Harold. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Hey, I told Nick earlier, I did not think you had kids old enough to be dating in high school. And I heard you talking with Connor yesterday. You said your daughter is dating a football player. And then Nick
Yeah.
told me, yeah, homecoming. Yeah, like homecoming pictures
Facebook's
were up
a beautiful
on Facebook.
Yeah. She's 16 and she can drive.
That's even scarier.
If this makes anybody feel better, she's like way more mature this year than she was last year when she couldn't drive. So
Okay.
the driving has actually been a really good thing for us. I don't know if that's everybody's story, but it's been ours so far.
Something we were just talking about before we brought you on, and you know the situation because you have somebody that you work with in Stu Pospisil who is very passionate about what's going on in high school athletics. And we get the news last night that Benson is shutting down the season just because they don't have 23 players. I mean, this is a safety thing. It's also a bigger picture thing. Stu wrote about it. You've talked about it. What is an answer for this without the moving heaven and earth and getting the unicameral involved and changing laws and stuff? So maybe we get the Bensons or the co-ops or the smaller OPS schools that they can maybe compete on a Friday night.
Yeah. So Stu's written a couple of pieces that I encourage people to read at the Omaha World-Herald. One of them has actually predated Lincoln High forfeiting the second half in Benson. It was a scheduling story just about the way that maybe 180-day sit-outs can be a more effective transfer policy than 90-day sit-outs. And then once Lincoln High forfeited, resigned at halftime, Stu fleshed out a couple more thoughts related to just the way that the classes and scheduling work. I think there's some things that the NSA membership can do. Obviously, the Benson situation is difficult because Benson was a pretty competitive football team 3 years ago. And then, the coach at Benson went to Central. A lot of players went with him. And, that left Benson in a really tough spot. I think 17 players, something like that, went with him. And so that left Benson in a hard spot. And it's been a very difficult, road since then. There's other schools in OPS that have struggled as well, especially at the football level. And so that's an ongoing challenge. I think you've got to find a way to develop youth league football, specifically in OPS, to get players maybe more prepared for the sport once they get to high school and they want to play it. Football is a sport that you can pick up late in life. You don't, or late in your youth. It's not a sport you need to play when you're 9. You can be very, very good starting the sport when you're 14, and there's reasons for that. Some of it's based on physical maturity and whatever, but just finding a way to get kids ready. But I do think the transfer policies need to be examined, and that's probably the area where you're going to see the most focus put is. And then again, like one of the larger issues here is that there's a feeling that there's really only 2 teams that in Class A that can compete, and they have they've pretty actively added transfers to their roster, and so or they've got kids living all over the city, and so it feels hard because it feels like these are almost like magnet schools, even though they're not charter schools, but they kind of function that way when it comes to football, and so that's challenging. At the same time, there's other schools that are dominant in other sports. We're not talking about private schools, but you could also see a private school multiplier that makes things more challenging for schools that are able to sort of pick the players that they want and put them in a private school. So there's a lot of different things that I think will be discussed over the next 3 to 6 months, but obviously you don't want to see what happened over the last 5 days happen again.
Yeah, and I know Stu had an article when this was after the second half forfeiture last week of the Millard South Lincoln High game. A guy that I played for and I respect tremendously, and Dan McLaughlin. I feel like there are a lot of coaches out there that had coached. Hell, Dan McLaughlin coached Norfolk when they beat Benson in the Torrey Velan Benson team in the state championship
Yes.
game, which feels so long ago. But, these are guys that are still involved in high school football. He's helping out Larry Martin at Omaha North. People like that. I know they're always asked about what they think, and I think we all know the answer. It's the solution, Sam, and that's where I feel like there are probably good ideas, but I don't. Is there one solution that's going to appease everyone? I don't know if that exists.
No, I don't think so. I don't think there is one thing that can resolve it. I do wonder what the 180-day transfer system would accomplish. And here's what I think is notable there. Like, if you create a system where it's really hard to transfer, from school to school without basically sitting out a season, then in theory you could be running into a situation where kids stay at a school for longer, or they're trying to identify these kids before they even go to high school and trying to sort them into certain programs. But there's no one thing I don't think that's going to solve it.
Yeah.
It's just something that we need to write more about, not just from a this is what the NSA needs to do perspective, but examining what's going on in some of the schools. And I do feel like OPS is actually Omaha and metro areas stayed ahead of the curve in some ways. I think if you were to go to some other cities not that far away, you would find that there's schools that have been bad in high school football for 25 years because these problems have already sort of revealed themselves. And I feel like Omaha's been more resilient than that. But you've seen, I think, in the last however many years that these things are starting to happen, and that there's got to be a way to alleviate the concerns. You don't see it as much in basketball. Obviously,
No.
there's only 5 players that are starting and playing at any one time, so it's a little different.
Yeah.
You can field a pretty darn good basketball team, with more limited roster numbers, and obviously a lot of teams have. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I think it's going to take some creative changes on a number of people's parts.
Sam McKewon of the World-Herald joining us. Let's shift to this week, and it's a big game. Kind of has a big game feel, maybe not as much because it's a road game, but it's still a big game for both teams. And special teams seems to come up every single day. Rule said improve focus. What did you take from he has talked about it and he knows that they've got to figure things out. But what did you take that well, he was talking about it yesterday. Oh, by the way, and this is so on brand for George, he slipped in that Coach Darlington showed up with a folder full of ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure that there's some things that Nebraska can try in terms of blocking schemes or strategies. I think the challenge that they have, and I kind of wrote this in the rewind, is, and I don't think this was true in George Darlington there, incidentally. I think the late Dan Young managed kickers and punters and did all that stuff really well. And part of that, I think, was because Dan was a high school coach. And so, I think when you're in high school, you just have a different developmental mindset about X, Y, and Z. But the point that I'm making is that, like, a lot of times we will regard the kickers and the punters and the snappers as almost like IT specialists, that are like working on your computer network, and you don't really want to know what they're doing to fix the computer network or the wireless network that's down. You just want them to do it. And they're going to have to engage it more. I think there's got to be. I'm just not sure how you came into a situation over the summer where you had a player that was banged up. Basically, it was a golfer with a broken wrist. Tristan Albano is a kicker with a injury in his kicking area, and you just didn't. There wasn't a larger plan around it. And how did you get to the point where you're having to take? I mean, you can only take 70 some players on the trip, and you got 2 of them have to be long snappers. That's so there's just things that and I put a lot of that on the head coach. I wrote that. Head coach has got to manage a roster, and head coach has got to dial down, regardless of who your special teams coordinator is. And I just feel like they're probably putting more work and urgency into that than maybe they have. So special teams, I think, is a wild card almost all the time. When you get great specialists, It's not like you can set it and forget it, but like it's a huge advantage when you don't have them, or you have specialists like last night in the Jets game, a great player who suddenly just kind of lost
Mhm.
some of whatever this year. And man, that's tough. It becomes very, very hard to get out of that vortex. And so I suspect Nebraska may struggle all season with field goals. I do think the punting thing can get resolved though.
And Sam, that leads me to my next question. Gary and I were talking about this earlier, and it's funny. I look at our stream and I see this comment by Steven of, you guys realize that last year NU loses that Rutgers game. It is interesting, and maybe it's because we'd had an extra week to process one of the major things that's impacting Nebraska, and you just said it right there, special teams, that even in a win against Rutgers in a close game, the close games that we always talk about Nebraska not being able to win, that they win that. We built up Rutgers. I'm not saying just you, but we all had respect for Rutgers coming in. And yet people are almost a little bit more down on this team than they were after the loss to Illinois. Is it where do you connect that to? And are you sensing that too, that people are a little bit more critical of this team after a win against a Rutgers team?
I don't know. I mean, I think people are just hungry to win. And so you see all these college football games on Saturdays, and I think fans just want to be a part of it, and
Yeah.
here you go. Indiana's a flavor of the week. And Indiana was the equivalent of the kid eating chalk last year, and now they're 6-0 and they're favored to be 7-0, and I don't even know who they play after that. But I mean, I don't think it's. I think they've got a chance to they're gonna have an outside chance at the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's just a feeling of like, when does Nebraska get to be that team?
Mhm.
And when does Nebraska get a good win? And so I think what you saw, and people watch the games this weekend, and of course, Iowa and Wisconsin and USC, and there's a sense of like, well, maybe 6-6 is the best they can do, and
It's
like,
changed.
uh, yeah, it's just I don't know. I think they've got a very good chance of beating Indiana. I really do. I think they've got to play a good football game, but I think there's things that Indiana likes to do or wants to be about that Nebraska can slow down on defense. They really can. I didn't get the sense yesterday that Rule was like super worried. Um, I think he made some comments. He wasn't necessarily attributing them to Indiana, but the comments about feeling bad about defensive coordinators that don't defend, power offenses and things like that. I'm like, this game is going to be more of a muscle game from Nebraska and a little bit more finesse from Indiana.
Mhm.
We'll just have to see what happens. I think that's what fans are starting to feel is
Sure.
this. They've been very supportive for a very long time and want to see, they want to see Nebraska volleyball as a
Mm.
Nebraska football program.
Yep.
Like, you just see how they look at the volleyball program, and nobody was worried on Friday night that they were going to lose to Purdue. I was checking social media. It's Nebraska volleyball. They want that for the football program. And you can explain to people, you got to understand that's way harder than it seems, because everybody emphasizes football the way that Nebraska volleyball emphasizes volleyball. But at the end of the day, you got to find a way to you know to keep getting better. And Rule is trying to do it systematically. He's doing more of a slow cook than Kurt Signetti did.
Mhm.
And in 3 years' time, you know what? Maybe Indiana won't be very good because they had to add all these transfers. So year 2 is going to be pretty hard around there. But I think it's more the feeling that Nebraska fans are like, well, this year it'll be Indiana, next year it'll be Minnesota, and this year it'll be this. And
Mhm.
why doesn't Nebraska get to have that season? And we'll see. They beat Indiana on Saturday.
They're the hot
Everything's
team
going to
again.
feel a lot different real
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were the
Yeah.
hot team
You're right.
3 weeks ago going into that Illinois game. Sam, how do
Yep.
you think they balance in this particular game, a road game, with a bye week and Dylan looking at what happened against Rutgers defensively? The weather is going to be a lot better to be a quarterback. How do you think they balance in a road game being safe with your quarterback or being aggressive with Dylan?
Well, it could come down to the game. I think Nebraska's going to want to go in there and run clock and try to control the football game and keep the score in the 20s. That'd be Nebraska's preference, I guess. But if Indiana comes out, let's say Indiana wins the toss, or they want the ball. Indiana gets it. And they go right down and score. I don't think they're gonna hold too much back, Dylan. I think this is going to be a game where they look at the defense and say, yeah, we can move the ball on that defense. Like, I think there's a sense of, Maryland did it, Northwestern did it, Charlotte kind of did it. The UCLA game doesn't mean much because UCLA's offense is awful. So you don't put a lot of stock into that game. You look at the other games and you say, you know what, our offense can be better than those. And so if it gets into a scoring match, I don't think they're going to be too afraid to do some of the things that they got to do to move the ball and to score. But I don't think they want that game. I think they want 24, control the game, limit Indiana's possessions, find a way to get a turnover or two, run the football, and get out of there with a win. Not, I don't think anybody in that football office thinks it can be 42-10. I think if they think they can win the game, I think they feel confident about that, but they prefer to win it in a certain way, not 38-35.
I absolutely agree. Should be an interesting game. It'll be fun at 11 o'clock on Saturday. Safe trip out to Bloomington. Look forward to the coverage from you and the boys.
All right, take care.